Yes.
Mike has been like, you know, our head technician. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can be seen right here. And we now have several.
Forehead. I mean,
we have several other technicians as well, but Mike does all the training for them as well. And so, when we talk about different problems that we encounter with machines, there's been a few questions that I want to ask you about.
No.
But can you briefly go over what the letters T and T mean? Because that's kind of the process you go through when it comes to first diagnosing a machine.
So usually I think about it as because when the person comes in, they've got a problem with their machine, is that they're actually ready to blow it up. What is TNT stand? It's dynamite, right? So that's maybe how hot the person is coming in. They're ready to get rid of it. So I use TNT. It stands for thread, needle, and then tension. And that's the order that you always want to troubleshoot in, is thread first, meaning check your thread. If it's broken or caught, how old's your thread? Rethread it. Check your bobbin. Rethread your bobbin. And then do a sew off. It still has the same problem. Then the next one is, and some of you out there may have this special needle that you made your grandmother use in her sewing machine, and you keep using it.
Don't keep using it.
Don't keep using it. Put it into a picture frame and frame it.
There you go.
That you can keep it. But the way I was taught was every quilt deserves its own needle. That's the way to think about it.
Not every machine deserves its own needle. Every quilt, every project
deserves its new needle. So, and some of those it gets into is that maybe they have too small of a needle for the thread they're using. So you always want to check to see what size you have versus the type of thread you're using, because a lot of people think that I'm going to buy a jeans needle that's usually a 90-14 because I'm doing jeans. But if you're doing an embroidery design on a set of jeans, you need the embroidery needle that matches the thread you're using, not necessarily the fabric going in. Now sometimes when you get into knits or into lace, you want to have dull points because you don't want the point to actually break the fiber that's there, because then the whole thing will fall apart. So there are reasons to do the needle.
So that would be called a ballpoint needle.
Ballpoint.
Yeah. And then the third thing is
the tension,
but this is where a lot of people think that you should, like, they automatically jump to, oh my goodness, I have 6 skip stitches, or I have this or that, and they automatically go to tension. But really, the first thing you should do is check your needle.
Check your needle. Well, thread first, rethread,
and then needle.
Check your needle.
And then the last is tension.
The last one, tension.
Talk to us about tension.
So tension, I mean, it's hard to really describe it, but if you do a straight stitch on your sewing machine, the top and the back of the fabric should look exactly the same. Like if you didn't know which side was up and you dropped the paper, your fabric, you shouldn't be able to tell which side was the top and the bottom other than where you start, because usually you'll have the thread sticking up on the start, and maybe it cuts and pulls the fabric to the back on the back when you cut your threads. But other than that, it should all be the exact same look. Then a zigzag is what I like doing. Is a zigzag, the top will look perfect, and you'll see a little bit of a pull to the back because they want the points on the zigzag to be as exact and pretty as possible, because you may cover up the back with something else.
So Mike, if you're seeing the thread pulling to the bottom, okay, think about this with any problems you've had. If you see it pulling to the bottom, what does that mean? Is your tension too tight, or is it too loose?
Well, you have two tensions. You have the tension of the top thread, and you have a tension of the bobbin thread. So the way to think of this is a tug of war, that you want the top thread tension to match the bottom thread tension. If you're using different threads, then you're going to have
different weights of thread.
Different weights of thread. You're going to have different tension because of the weights of the thread. So you've got to match that. But one key factor, like if you put the top thread in the top and you put the same thread in the bobbin, you know that's there. So you're troubleshooting yourself to say, I'm going to put the same thread top and bottom, sew it. And then if it ends up being that it's pulling too far to the back, there's two things. One, the bobbin thread is too much, okay, or the top thread is not in the tension disc. Okay.
Okay. So usually a lot of people think, oh, if I'm seeing threads pull to the bottom, I've got issues with my bottom tension.
My
But
bobbin's too strong.
it's actually your top tension,
Could
right?
be. Yep.
Okay.
And a lot of times it is that it hasn't been fed directly through the tension disc, so it's sitting on the outside. When the tension's pressed together, the thread is sitting on the outside instead of inside the tension disc. And that's where you'll see a lot of it. The other way you'll see if it's pulling to like it's pulling to the top. The sad part is, and I've had too many of these, and I feel really bad when I show a lady that she's got the bobbin in upside down. Because if the bobbin goes in upside down, that means there's no bobbin tension. It's just going to come out freely. It doesn't sit in there correctly, and everything will be pulling to the top. And so usually if it's pulling to the top, it's usually a bobbin problem. If it's pulling to the bottom, it's usually a top problem, unless the path that the thread is coming through the top adds extra tension. For example, on the very end, when you put your thread in, you usually have the bar and you put your thread on top of it. A lot of times people put a spool cap so that it doesn't come off. If that spool cap is too big, then you're creating an extra tension over top.
So you should always use the same size spool cap as is the thread.
The thread. And some of them depends on if the thread is wound right next to each other, that it just keeps going all the way. You see some other threads that they actually wind bigger, that they're not right next to each other. So that adds extra tension as well. But a lot of times when it comes to tension, people think the machine's gone bad, but I'd have to say 85 to 90% of the times when there is bad tension, that you've checked the thread, you've changed the needle, you do it ends up being that it just needs to be serviced. It needs to be serviced, that you have to have, that there's some lint caught somewhere and stuff like that you want to get out.
Let me see right in there. Okay, yes. Okay, so a couple questions that we had was, someone asked, they're having problems with every time they go to sew, their thread comes out from the needle.
Okay.
What can you do to solve that problem?
So usually if it's coming out, it means that the needle is too big for the size of the thread that you're using. Or something is catching the thread on the top that's pulling it when it's trying to go down, that it's holding the thread and it doesn't let it slide down.
Could it also be pressure foot height?
Not too much, but if you know, a lot of time you'll see it if they're doing monofilament, that you're doing monofilament thread, and that's just really slippery.
Yeah.
So what you end up doing is you hold the thread, and you start with needle down. You hit needle down while you're holding the thread. So now you're starting with the thread down, and you can start sewing from there, and it's not going to be the big issue. So sometimes you start with the needle down and thread in there. Could it also
be like needing a software upgrade or update? I mean, could that be any issues for some of those more?
No, not necessarily, but a lot of the manufacturers provide a free update.
So check to make sure you have the most recent update.
The rating. But for thread coming out, I would check the size of the needle versus the thread that you're using.
Carol says this happens after she uses her scissors and it cuts it too short.
Okay, so usually if that's cutting too short, a lot of times it's the thread on the top that is actually stretching it a little too tight, almost like when you stretch out a ribbon and you pull it and it curls on itself, because it's going to go back to its natural state. And if it's being cut, the thread, the needle, the blade doesn't normally move. What you do is you pull the thread past the blade so it cuts it, and then it ends up just enough of a tension, it pulls it. When it cuts it, the thread's popping back out, so it's pulling. It's like overstretched, then you cut it, and then it just stretches back and comes out of the needle.
Okay.
So sometimes I would say
what would you do to fix that?
I would check and see that the path the thread is going in, that there's not something extra tension up on top, that you may not see it in the stitch, but you see it when it cuts it. That's where I'd probably check. If you're using a separate spool stand to make sure that it's not rubbing against something, if you're not using the stand that's built into the machines, and sometimes some of them, if you're using the big spools, you can't fit those in the top, so they use a spool stand to make sure there's no thread path that's creating extra tension. because you won't see it until you cut it, because it can be overstretched. It may be pulling things up. It won't look as good a tension. But when you cut it, it's just going to pop right out of the needle. So that is a strong possibility. So.
Okay, so some things to think about, some things to consider. Someone earlier had asked, is it okay to use unwaxed dental floss to clean the tension the tension discs? Would you recommend that? Or
I probably wouldn't recommend it. I mean, that's me as a technician, because if it, even though it's unwaxed or waxed, if any of that piece breaks off in there, then your tension discs will not close. And you think of how thin a piece of thread is, that it knows when the thread's going through or not going through. It's a simple, I mean, this is more technical, but you're talking less than 1/2 of a gram of pull, which is very small. Like I can't even do that with my finger, but that will change your tension immediately. So
not recommended.
Not recommended.
Not recommended. Okay.
Now, if you have a concern, what you can do is take a 2-foot long piece of thread, okay, and you thread it like you normally would all the way through the machine, and you just keep pulling it. You don't put it through the needle, but then you pull it all the way through the tension disc
and try and clear it out
and see if you can clear it out by pulling it out with a standard piece of thread.
Yeah.
You might be able to do that same thing with an unwaxed dental floss, but I mean, you're using thread. I would just pull the thread through. So I wouldn't create a knot or anything. But
okay, someone had asked, is it better to vacuum out your machine or use spray?
Okay, so this is going to be machine dependent.
Yes.
Okay. The big thing is if there are springs or anything that are inside a vacuum, you've got to be careful of if it's too strong. Because you pop that spring out, because you stretch it and it just sucks it right off. Where that spring is, if it overstretches the springs because of a vacuum, then that's when you're ready to. Can you use a vacuum? Yes. You just got to be careful when you stick the point in. I wouldn't stick a full garage, shop vac in there. But
no.
There's some.
But do you recommend canned air? A lot of people wonder about that, but I'm thinking probably not.
So canned air, the thing you have to be careful with canned air is canned air. It's meant to stay vertical. That's why they give you that long, 6-inch plastic tube. Is because the canned air, you need to keep the can vertical, and then you can bend that plastic tube where you need to spray it. If you tilt it to the side and spraying, the chemical that's in there that helps it, the compressed air can come out. And that's 99% of the time is corrosive to metal.
Yeah.
And so if you're spraying it down where all the gears are, you're going to get rust in there. If you put the canned air too close to where the oil is or the grease is, it ends up being that you can actually force by air that grease out of the correct spot, and then you're going to get metal against metal or plastic against plastic that's rubbing it.
Of issues.
Yeah, so you just have to be careful if you just spritz it a little bit.
Into other crevices and stuff that you don't want.
Spritz a little bit. I mean, I remember, you told me about 6 years ago. I taught a kind of a maintenance class, and the first thing my wife said to all the ladies before she introduced, she said, ladies, you can take off any screw you want off this machine. But if my husband has to put it back, we're charging you double.
Such a dork. Okay.
So that's what the thing is.
No.
It's mainly if you let your husbands do it. I think that's what she was talking about. So, but
that's right.
No, don't be afraid to understand. If somebody comes in, they want to be able to take off the needle plate and clean the underneath the needle plate. I have no problem teaching and educating somebody how to do that, because I think it's positive. It lets you understand your machine. If you break a needle, you can take the needle plate off and look and see if you find the end of it, because you don't want that rolling around down there causing problems. But no, that's probably about it.
Okay. Let's see. When changing threads, do I pull from the top or bottom to unthread? We know the
Good
answer
question.
to this.
So we know that. So you always pull it like the way the thread goes through the tension disc.
Through the bottom.
So you can do it differently. You can actually pretend like you're unthreading the machine at the top. If you don't like cutting your thread, you can grab it at the top when it's wound already, and follow the same path that you were threading it to unthread it. Okay, but you don't want to pull it out the top, because you're going through usually a pre-tension, a post-tension, and the tension disc. So you have 3 spots that if it gets caught in there, like I said, even a gram or two change, you're going to see the tension show up.
I always like to cut mine at the top and then just pull it through.
Pull it down from the
just
needle.
Get into the habit of that, and you shouldn't have any issues with tension.
Yeah, I mean, if you're worried about losing that extra foot, just put that in your husband's dental floss area.
That's right. Brenda asked, a spool stand will help with some of that when you're talking about
So a spool stand, it's more so if the thread doesn't fit in your machine to do a spool stand, but when it comes off the spool stand to the machine, you need to make sure that there's not anything extra that it's rubbing against, that it's actually going straight into the tension disc area that you need to, and I wouldn't have any concern. Because sometimes you get those spools that have 5,000 meters on them, that white, and you have, a lot of people have that. And you want to use it. Just got to make sure that the spool stand is higher than the side of your machine, so you don't get extra rubbing on the end of it. So.
Okay. Oh, you're saying that the thread comes all the way up to the top and then
goes into the machine. You don't want it rubbing against the side of the machine and then.
Or it changes.
That adds extra tension right there by that
definitely.
little triangle.
Okay, Rosie's question, what causes bird nests? I get those a lot.
So bird nests are usually, if it's nesting on the bottom, is that the top thread did not make it through the tension disc. Which sometimes that happens is if something breaks, you re-thread it, and you don't raise the presser foot. Because when the presser foot is down, the tension discs are closed. And so now if they're closed with it down and you're trying to re-thread it, you're trying to get this little teeny thread to go between two tension discs. So when you open it, they open so then the thread can come in, and that's where I would, most of the time it's the top thread needs to be re-threaded and correctly into the tension disc. That's usually when a bird's nest happens.
Okay, I hope that helps, Rosie.
And she's probably told you if you have any other questions that you're afraid to ask her online. She's given my email out to so many people. I don't even know how I'm going to answer all these emails in a day, but it's Mike, M-I-K-E, at mygirlfriendsquiltshop.com, and I'd be glad to go back. And if you've got a picture you want to send saying this is what my problem is, I'd be glad to try to help you answer it by a picture too.
That'd be great. That'd be great. A lot of people, I think, would really appreciate that right now, as they're not able to get in to their local dealer, perhaps. So let us help you. Carol says, how do you adjust the bobbin tension?
Okay, so the bobbin tension, first of all, I'm going to state this. Don't adjust the bobbin tension. But on there's a screw, and most of the manufacturers, when it comes from the factory, they put a little piece of Loctite paint on there. So if you try to adjust the screw, it actually cracks the paint, so that we as technicians can know you've done something to this tension disc. Okay. Most manufacturers provide an alternate bobbin that you can actually adjust the tension. They don't change they don't put paint on it, so you can manually adjust it because maybe you want to have a decorative look of some sort. But that's basically, it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. The way you undo the screw, to do it left, counterclockwise is to loosen it, clockwise is to tighten it. But you're looking at that as really as 1 minute increments in a 60-second clock. So you don't want to just turn it a quarter turn, because that's like 50 minutes. You just want to do a teeny 1 minute at a time and then recheck it. And that's how you can do it, left or right, depending on loosey or
tiny increments.
Tiny increments.
Like, what did you call it? Second?
1 minute on a 60, or 1 second on a 60-second clock. So just 1 second. I usually say a minute
on a 60-minute
clock.
Okay. Kathleen has a question. Another issue. What causes your bobbin thread coming up through the top when doing machine embroidery?
Okay, so machine embroidery, most of the time your embroidery thread is supposed to be stronger than your top thread. So this is where the tension by default is creating a pull to the back. If your thread comes through the top, there's two things. One, make sure that it's embroidery thread on the bottom and not cotton thread, because cotton is weaker than embroidery, and the embroidery could pull it up. I won't talk about how you tell the difference between the two bobbin threads because I don't want to start any fires. But so if you burn the end, cotton actually has a flame.
Don't do that at home.
If you burn embroidery, it melts. So that's how you know if you don't know if it is. But don't do that in the house. I didn't tell you anything. I'll deny anything about it. Yes. So sometimes that's what it is. The other aspect is if it's pulling to the top, sometimes it's just the bobbins upside down, or well, with embroidery, you always want to have stabilizer. So sometimes if you don't have stabilizer, you'll see that come up on you, that you don't want it to come up. So
right.
That's a little, I mean, other than that, it's really, once again, it's rethread or check your thread. Make sure that it is a bobbin, an embroidery bobbin thread. I've had some machines that it may need to be increased to where you've got, it should be using a 90 weight, and sometimes you change it to a 60 and it actually looks better. But that's going to be machine specific. I mean, really is going to be, I mean, checking your owner's manual or contacting the dealer that you sold it from to ask some questions on that. But most of the time that's what it is. So.
Okay. These are some great questions, you guys. Do you have any other questions that we can help answer while we have him? And he really is serious about if you've got any problems going on with your machines. It's okay if you're not local. If you just need some advice, just email him, and he's really great to visit with. He can talk to you through a few things by email or even by phone.
I did a FaceTime checking out if there was a problem with the thing, and the lady I spoke to, it ended up being that she had broke her needle. She put it back in, but she didn't push it all the way. So then immediately the needle's not all the way in, so then your tension's completely off.
Yeah, and he can help troubleshoot for you. Now, he might not be able to do everything, virtually, because that's really hard, but at least he can help you get started with the process and know if it's something that you think you need to, go see the doctor for.
Right? That's right.
Okay, here's another. We'll take a couple more questions. Diane asks, is it better to wind the bobbin on the slowest speed?
So I've watched this and I've read some things. So really the medium speed will give you the smoothest wrapping around, and your bobbin should always fill from top to bottom and back and forth. It should always keep going back and forth. You don't want it to stay at one top and then move to the middle and come back to the top, and that would need to be an adjustment made. But slow speed supposedly gets you a little bit more thread. Medium speed is usually there. High speed will give you less thread, is really the concept.
Interesting. So, I never realized that.
Yeah.
What I was saying earlier was that you want to keep it a consistent speed too.
Yeah.
That's really even more important than anything, is making sure it's consistent.
You don't want to start out slow and then go fast. You want to keep it consistent.
Okay, so that brings to another question. Let me pull this up. Okay, Karen asks, what causes the bobbin to wind uneven? More goes on the top than on the bottom.
So most of that is there's
speed,
a little,
most
machines have a little adapter to the side of the bobbin that just needs to be adjusted in or out or up or down to give that more of an evenness. So it's just something, if you take it in, make a comment and have them adjust it, to have them look at it so they can actually be winding a bobbin that we may use for testing, which isn't as crucial when we're just doing a practice sew off. But most of the time it's just that little thing on the side needs to be adjusted because it's maybe a little bit too low, so it's forcing the thread to go up higher on the top. So
okay, let me see.
Now if you've got, the one thing about winding a bobbin, if you have metal bobbins, you got to be careful, because a lot of metal bobbins, if you wind it too fast or too strong of a tension up there, it can actually warp the metal, and then it's not fixable. Plastic ones, you'll see them start to break when they've been wound too many times. That's when you'll see a crack, and that's when you need to throw them away. So
okay, Donna asks, does Janome sell pre-wound embroidery thread bobbins?
Boy, I'm not sure if Janome does. I'd have to check. I know the manufacturer that the ones we sell with our baby lock ones that we have here can be used in Janome because they're pretty much the same size, and pre-wounds are not meant to be used a second time. So when you buy a pre-wound bobbin, the idea is that you throw that away, or if you want to store something else on it, but it's not meant to be used twice. You can get away with it, but the way they wind them, but I would probably, I could check for Janome. We can do that. I can maybe let Kris know the answer by tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. And we can reply back in the comments too later on.
Okay.
So Joyce has something nice to say. She said, Mike and Ken saved us on our long arm with pictures.
Okay.
So, yep.
It's probably all Ken's fault. Whatever went wrong, right? No, I'm just teasing. So.
We're glad that they were able to help you out with that, Joyce. No problem at all. All right. Let me think real quick. Okay, how about a problem with shredding or breaking of metallic threads sometimes?
Okay, so shredding and breaking of metallic threads. So the way those threads are designed, there is a piece of metal in there. And so that metal can actually be, it makes it weaker of a thread. So sometimes you need to go slower than you might think about. You need to slow down
the machine.
Slow down the machine. And if you use the scissor cutters, if your machine has scissor cutters, you'll replace the blade sooner with that metal threads. But
that's true.
That's usually you're going maybe a little too fast for that thread because it becomes a weaker thread just because of the
another
nature
thing
of it.
that I like is having the metallic thread sitting away from the machine, still being able to using a thread stand, but away because it gives it a longer pathway before it gets hot. Have you ever heard of that?
I haven't.
Maybe
But the way
it's
I've
in
seen
my
some
own
people
mind.
sew, and I've had some people sew so much that their machine sees, so I know that there's got to be something getting hot somewhere.
I'm just saying that metallic thread, when you think about, and it causes friction, and boom, before you know it, it snaps.
No.
That's your non-technical Kris talking. All right. Okay, these were all some really good questions. So thank you so much,
I'll get
Miguel,
out of here.
for doing that with
All
me.
right.
And where's my frying pan that I get to
Boom.
right there?
As long as I get to have a soft chair to sit at work, I'm good with it.
I hope that was helpful to all of you out there. And let me tell you, I really appreciate having Mike know these things because now I can just always have him there to help with any of those kinds of issues when I have things like that come up with my machine, which we all will.